So, you're running a global business, and that means you're dealing with a ton of data. But here's the thing, managing that data is way more complicated than just finding a place to store it. We're getting into legal control, compliance, and this really critical difference between data sovereignty and data residency. Honestly, not knowing this difference can completely sink your international strategy. Which leads me to this really important question. Is your global data truly under your control? If you have to hesitate even for a second, you might be exposed to some massive legal and financial risks, and you might not even know it. This isn't just some back office IT problem, this is a core business strategy question. And at the very center of this whole challenge is a super common but dangerous mix-up. People use the terms data sovereignty and data residency like they're the same thing, but they are absolutely not, and making that mistake can lead to some serious legal trouble and a compliance strategy that's basically built on shaky ground. Okay, first up, let's talk about data sovereignty. This one is all about which country's laws have the final say over your data. Think of it like this. Let's say you're a US company and you store your European customer data on a server that's physically in Ireland. You might think it's covered by Irish or EU law, right? Well, because of data sovereignty, US laws could still apply to that data. It's all about legal power, not the physical address. Now, data residency, this one is much more straightforward. It's literally just about the zip code of your data. It's about where that server is physically located. So, for instance, a law in Germany might demand that all financial data for German citizens has to be stored on servers inside Germany's borders. It's all about geography, plain and simple. So knowing the definitions is one thing, but where the rubber really meets the road and where the risk really lies is in how these two things play out in the real world. So let's dive into the 5 critical differences that every single global enterprise has got to understand. All right, the first big difference is control versus location. Sovereignty is all about who has the legal authority, the legal power. Residency is just about the physical spot. And this is where it gets tricky. You could be following all the rules, storing your data in, say, Germany to meet their residency laws, but if your company is based in the US, American authorities could still demand access to that data because of sovereignty. And that leads us right to difference number 2, the scope. Data residency rules are pretty narrow. They're specific, like this type of data must stay in this country. But sovereignty? Oh, its scope is massive. It crosses borders. A US law like the Cloud Act, for example, can force a US-based company to turn over data, even if that data is sitting on a server somewhere in Europe. It's incredibly far-reaching. So what happens if you get this wrong? Well, if you violate a residency rule, you're probably looking at some hefty fines or maybe a breach of contract. That's bad for sure. But a sovereignty violation? Whoa. Now you are in a whole different league of trouble. We're talking about massive international legal battles with governments fighting over who gets access to your data. The stakes are just so much higher. Naturally, these differences totally change how you handle things on the tech side. For residency, you can use tools we all know, like geofencing and setting up regional storage. But sovereignty, that requires something way more advanced. You need what's called a jurisdiction-aware architecture. Basically, your system has to be smart enough to understand complex international law, and you have to do some serious legal digging into your cloud providers. And finally, all of this comes to a head when you're deciding on your cloud strategy. Residency affects your infrastructure decisions, right? Like which regional data centers you pick. But sovereignty forces you to put your vendors under a microscope. You have to ask, where is my cloud provider actually headquartered? Because the laws of their home country could suddenly apply to all of your data. Let's just pause for a second and really let the stakes here sink in. We are talking about cross-border legal fights, crippling financial penalties, governments clashing over who gets your data, potential breaches of international law, and even being kicked out of key markets. This is absolutely not something any business can afford to just wing it on. So after all that, after seeing this legal and technical minefield, the billion-dollar question is, how in the world do you actually build a data architecture that can handle all of this? How do you become both compliant and truly sovereign? Well, the reality is, this is not a DIY project. Trying to tackle this alone is a huge risk. Navigating this landscape requires an incredible amount of legal and technical expertise. You really need a strategic partner who gets it, someone who can translate all these complicated rules into a real, practical, and secure system. And this is exactly where a company like Stonefly comes into the picture. They specialize in building these kinds of systems. Remember that jurisdiction-aware architecture we talked about? They do that. They can implement that precise geofence storage to nail your residency requirements. And this is huge. They help you build a cloud strategy that actually vets your vendors to cut down on that legal exposure.
So, look, the big takeaway here is pretty simple. It is time to stop guessing and hoping you're compliant. It's time to start intentionally building a strategy that gives you real control and, the ability to sleep at night. If you want to protect your global operations and get that true control over your data, the next move is to build a solution that's custom fit for your organization's unique needs. I'd really recommend talking to the experts at Stonefly to figure out how they can help. You can reach them at sales@stonefly.com to get started on designing a data strategy that's actually sovereign and compliant.